Hi, I'm Carol Anne Riddell, and welcome to a new season of Book It. We've got a fun show ahead for you just in time for the school year. We begin today with best-selling author Gretchen Rubin and her book, Secrets of Adulthood. It's full of ideas for young adults and the rest of us grown-ups. Gretchen, thanks so much for stopping by. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you. I'm so happy to be talking to you today.
So the book is a collection of short sayings or aphorisms, as you describe it, simple truths for our complex lives. So let's start there. Can you explain what an aphorism is and why you think they're useful?
Yeah, no one knows what an aphorism is, so I call them secrets of adulthood. But basically, an aphorism is an observation about human nature, a general observation, but one that is attributed to a particular person. So Mark Twain said it, or Marcus Aurelius said it. It's something where we know who said it. And that's different from proverbs, which are folk wisdom that we repeat to each other, but we don't know who said it originally. So that's things like, a stumble may prevent a fall, or a stitch in time saves nine. That's a proverb. They kind of have this mic drop quality, where so you sort of say it all in a line or two. And because they're so short, I think they have more power in the mind. And they also kind of are very thought-provoking, because sometimes people don't agree with my secrets of adulthood, but even in deciding whether you agree or disagree, well, you know your own thoughts more clearly, and that's very gratifying.
Yeah, and I think there is something clarifying about trying to express yourself concisely, because shorter isn't necessarily easier.
Well, no, it's like that old saying about, I'm sorry I wrote you such a long letter, I didn't have time to write a short one. It's hard to be short, it's hard to be brief. Yeah.
So did you come up with all of these, or were some of them passed on to you?
Well, one of the things I do in everyday life is people will say things, and I will often, if they say wise things, I'll turn them over and over in my mind and then really try to make them punchy and succinct. So some of them are things that I've picked up along the way, but have put my own particular spin on the way that they're expressed.
And I understand that you originally sort of thought about writing this book with your daughters in mind, who are young adults.
They're young adults, and I thought, well, let me give them the wisdom that I've learned with time and experience, usually the hard way, and try to spare them some of the challenges and suffering that I went through. But I realized as I was writing them, I need them just as much as they do, because something like, working is one of the most dangerous forms of procrastination. I have to remind myself of that, a couple times a month. It's just a lesson that I have to, I need to remind myself of all these lessons just as much.
Yeah, absolutely. I know exactly what you mean. Well, one of the sayings that I really liked in the book is, choose the bigger life. And it really appeals to me on so many levels. It really speaks to me. But also because I'm a dog lover.
Yes.
So tell us the story behind that one.
Okay, so choose the bigger life is helpful when you're stuck, when you're trying to make a decision, but you can't decide, do I want an apple or do I want an orange? Sometimes everything seems perfectly in balance, and what can kind of clarify what you really want is to say, well, which is the bigger life for me? And people might have different answers. So for us in our family, my daughters really, really wanted to get a dog. But for me, I was like, the pros and the cons seem perfectly weighed. Like, all the happiness research says dogs make people happier, but it's the expense and the hassle and the time and the energy and, who wants it? And I couldn't, I was paralyzed. I couldn't make a decision. And then I thought, well, let's choose the bigger life. And instantly for me, I was like, the bigger life for our family is to get the dog. But for someone else, it might be, no, we want the freedom and the money and we'll get a dog later. But now the bigger life is not to have a dog. But for us, I knew the bigger life was to have the dog.
Yeah, and it's turned out that way for sure, right?
So much so that we just got another dog. We just got a second dog like last month, yes. So
even bigger.
A very little dog, but a bigger life.
Bigger life. Okay, another area that I was very interested in the book is when you talk about friendship. There is one in particular about a good friend versus a bad friend.
Yes, a good friend can be a bad friend if they bring out the worst in us.
So true.
Yes, and we've all had that friend where it's like we walk away and we think, oh my gosh, I really wish I hadn't had that long, mean gossip session, or I always spend too much, or I always drink too much, or I feel like maybe this person is going to end up stabbing me in the back.
Right.
I know they're not trustworthy. Are they a good friend? And by bringing out the worst in me, then they're just not a good friend.
And what I also like about that one, Gretchen, is that I think that is something that, at least for me, I grew into and understood over time.
Yes, you learn it the hard way.
Yeah. Another aphorism that I really liked, another secret of adulthood, if we take blame when we deserve it, people will give us responsibility. I feel like that's so important because there is a tendency in life to try to avoid blame.
Yes. So this was something that my father, in his own way, told me a lot when I was sort of a young working person, and I felt it very much. I was working at the Federal Communications Commission, and at that time I had a lot of people sort of reporting to me. And there was a report that was done, and I was in like the executive meeting, and it was like, this was wrong, how could these people have made this mistake? And everybody was sort of like bashing this team. And I really just didn't want to speak up and say like, oh, I was the one who gave them that direction, because I was very junior. But I thought, well, I got to do it. So I said, you know, that was my fault. I told them to do that. I'll go back and we'll like do it the right way. And I expected that would really kind of undermine my standing, but in fact, it really increased my standing, both because the people the senior team understood that I could take responsibility and learn from my mistakes, and then the people who were the team understood that I would stand up for them and not let them take the blame for something that was my fault.
I've really come to understand that there's a lot of power in owning your mistakes.
Tremendous, but it has to be when you deserve it, because you don't want to just make yourself a punching bag.
That's true.
For everybody who wants to pass the blame. It has to be like, this was my mistake.
Fair. So, you know, some of what you say in the book feels both obvious and incredibly illuminating at the same time, which was a very interesting sort of contrast to me.
My favorite thing when I read an aphorism is when I read it and I think, oh, I've thought that 100 times myself, but I just never quite put it into words.
Yes.
Yes.
So you have written and researched extensively on human nature and on happiness. Your books have sold millions of copies. So, not to put you on the spot with this question, but what would you say to someone if they asked you, what is the first step I need to take to start the path to happiness?
Well, it's funny, people always ask you that, and I never have a very satisfying answer. And so I actually have a quiz on my site, which will tell you, like, not just one, but you specifically, what is the habit for you? But in general, if I was going to say, is there a general place to start? The general thing I would say is relationships, because to be happy, we have to have strong, enduring bonds. So if you're trying to think of how to spend your time, energy, or money in a way that's going to make you happier, it's anything that will deepen relationships or broaden relationships. Whether that's like, should I go to my reunion? Should I join a book club? Should I join a running group? Should I take some time to chat to my neighbors? Should I linger after work for a few minutes to talk to my coworkers before I leave? Anything that deepens or strengthens or broadens relationships tends to make us happier.
Okay, everybody, we're hanging out afterwards.
Yeah, that's right.
Stick around and chat.
Yeah.
I heard you say in an interview, Gretchen, that your sister calls you a happiness bully.
She does.
I thought was very funny.
Yes, and well-deserved, I have to
But
admit.
how so? Like, how can one be a happiness bully?
Well, if I think there's a way for you to get happier, I can get pretty insistent, and I will be like, okay, we must pause the conversation right now and go very deep into like, you say you're not exercising and yet you want to exercise. Like, why is that? And what, you know, I'll have like 15 things that I will recommend. So yeah, I can come on pretty strong. Okay. I have a lot of suggestions if you give me an opening. Yeah.
You've also talked about how organization can be part of that happiness equation.
Yes. For most people, outer order contributes to inner calm.
Yeah, and we chatted about your book, Outer Order, Inner Calm, as you mentioned. And you know, I personally hate clutter. I love a clean closet. It does make me happy.
Yes.
But how does it apply more broadly?
Well, you know, this is one of these things that matters not at all to some people. So there are people who are truly clutter blind. We were talking about my sister. My sister doesn't care. It doesn't bother her at all if the cabinets are open and there's a giant stack of junk mail on the counter. She just literally does not see it. So if you don't care, you don't care. But for most people, outer order contributes to inner calm. And I think part of it is decision fatigue because, yeah, you're not deciding what to do with your stuff. You're just putting things away. It's easier to find things, so you're not... There's research showing that Americans spend a tremendous amount of time each year, like, looking for misplaced objects, so that's just very annoying. And there's just that visual... I imagine you're a simplicity lover. So there are abundance lovers who love profusion and choice and buzz. And simplicity lovers, though, they really want a bare surface and
that's
a clean shelf, and you know, and
Yeah.
so I think that for a lot of people, that's part of it.
Yeah, my husband is definitely an abundance lover because like has hundreds of T-shirts he cannot break up with, but he's very, very happy. So.
Yeah. When you're like, can't you just pick 8?
No. I tried that after you told me that suggestion.
Let's take a picture of them. Yeah.
That does not suffice.
Yeah.
There's one thing that we talked about from that book that has really stayed with me that I still use, which is the 1 minute rule.
Oh, yeah, I'm so glad you like that.
Yeah, and I just thought maybe you could explain that because it might be helpful to other people too.
It is surprising. Of all the things that I suggest to people, this is one that comes up over and over again. And it's just the very simple idea that if there is a task that you can do in less than a minute, you do it without delay. So you hang up your coat instead of throwing it on a chair, or you carry your trash and put it in the trash can instead of leaving it on a counter. You rip open a letter, look at it, and put it in the shredder. And what it does is it gets rid of that sort of scum of clutter that it can accumulate on the surface of life
scum of
that
clutter.
makes us feel weighed down, right?
Yeah.
Because you look around and there's there's the dog toys there, and the pillows are there, and my coat is there. And it just makes us feel weighed down, even though none of the things are consequential on their own. And since you're doing it just a minute at a time, you don't have to be like, okay, on Saturday I'm going to spend 3 hours cleaning up, which nobody wants to do. You just do it as you go. Don't you think it's very easy to incorporate?
Yes, it's easy, and I do think it's actually very effective too.
Yeah, it's just like, it doesn't take that long if you just do these little things as you go.
So going back to secrets of adulthood, is there one secret of adulthood that is your favorite or that you lean on the most?
Definitely. And that is accept yourself and also expect more from yourself. That took me a long time to understand. When I was first studying happiness, I was like, well, on the one hand, we want to show compassion for ourselves, and we don't want to chase some fantasy self. We want to admit the truth about who we are. But on the other hand, we want to push ourselves out of our comfort zone. We want to learn, we want to grow, we want to gain new identities, we want to stretch. So which is true? And then I thought, finally I realized they're both true. Accept ourselves and also expect more from ourselves. Each of us has to decide where that line is. Nobody can decide for us.
Lots to think about in there. Thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you. It's always so fun to talk to you.
Yeah, it really was great. Now let's head to our podcast studio to see what Isabel Ortiz has for us in Breaking Books.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Breaking Books. I'm Isabel Ortiz, and today I have the pleasure of sitting down with author Natalie Guerrero to discuss her debut novel, My Train Leaves at 3. Hi Natalie, thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I am super excited to discuss My Train Leaves at 3 because it is really a novel about a girl in New York City who is juggling things like grief and ambition and all the things that come with that.
Yeah.
But I would love if you can dive into the story of My Train Leaves at 3 and where do we find our main character, Xiomara, at the start of the book?
Yeah, so at the beginning of the novel, we find our main character, our protagonist, Xiomara, in Washington Heights. She's living with her mother, who is also grieving the loss of her daughter, and Xiomara is grieving the loss of her sister. They are down in the dumps. Xiomara is having really questionable relationships with men, and she's struggling to make rent. And all the while, she is trying to negotiate whether or not she should continue to follow her dream of becoming a New York City performer. And so we kind of find her in the heart of her grief, and there's this big question of, can she move forward into her dreams?
Xiomara is a deeply ambitious person, but like you said, with the death of her sister, she's kind of feels stunted.
Yes.
But what made you decide to focus on somebody who, let's say, has all of this ambition and who wants to achieve their dreams, but it also has to balance reality and the struggles of paying rent and family dynamics? What was that balance like for you?
I always say that Xiomara and her story really revealed itself to me. And when I was writing, it was really obvious to me that she was this amazing Dominican, Puerto Rican woman who had, just like every Latina I've ever met, has really big ideas and has really big dreams. And at the same time, in order to be responsible to your family sometimes, I think you have to put your own dreams to the side. And I really wanted Xiomara to grapple with that, but ultimately really wanted to show her, and also any reader that's reading, that there is room for both. Like, you can be a good daughter, you can be a good sister, and also you can do that best by being true to yourself and really going after what you want and providing for yourself first.
You write grief in such a way that feels really personal, but also very universal. So like if anybody has lost a sister or a loved one or somebody close to them, a friend, you could relate to the grief that Xiomara feels in the book, especially to like the mother at some points.
Yeah.
What was that like for you to have to write this close sister dynamic when from the beginning one part of that dynamic is gone and we're only getting glimpses of that?
Often I say that I measure how much I love something by how painful it would be if I lost that thing. I couldn't imagine living without my sisters. And those felt like appropriate stakes for a novel in that case.
Of course, yeah.
And also some of it, like I was saying earlier, really revealed itself to me. Like I had no idea that I had these big emotions about grief and potentially losing something that I love so much. What I loved about writing them was it was very cathartic to experience sisterhood from almost a place of looking back on it, because every moment that meant that when Xiomara and her sister were together in the book was so magical and was so important and felt like such an homage to their deep sisterhood. And it's just important to have sisters are, I think, the first loves of your life. And I think it's one of the most formative relationships I've ever had. Yeah. And I wish sisterhood on everyone.
Something that Xiomara really, I think before her sister died, something that gave her a lot of strength and hope was her singing, was her performing. And that was even cheered on by her sister.
Yeah.
Then she loses that.
Yeah.
Was that something that you felt like you were struggling with personally that you were able to put into the book? Losing something that maybe you once loved and kind of learning how to get that back and maybe rework that for yourself?
And I think that similarly to Xiomara, we were talking, I loved Broadway when I was a kid, and I loved musical theater as a kid, and I was doing a lot of it. And I felt like it was a part of myself that I really put away because I wanted to grow up. Right. And I didn't want to do it anymore, transparently, but it was a first love of mine. And so I think that when I got the opportunity to write Xiomara and I realized that musical theater could be the light in her very dark tunnel, I jumped at the opportunity because this reworking of finding something and finding art. I mean, obviously I'm a writer and an artist, but I really believe in the power of art, not to promote yourself, but to fill your own cup. And so I felt like for her, it was so beautiful and so important that she came back to her art as a way to fuel herself again, not to go off and be super successful or have validation from other people, but to validate yourself, right? When I was writing this book, I felt like every morning of writing this book was the best part of this entire process. Yeah. And I wanted that for her too, to enjoy the process of making art.
And as a woman too in the entertainment industry or trying to get into the entertainment industry, she deals with things like power dynamics and misogyny and abuse.
Yeah.
What really made you focus on that? Why did that really stick out to you? Because I feel like it's an issue that a lot of women face.
Yeah. After I graduated college, I started working in entertainment and entertainment adjacent, and I learned really quickly that there were a lot of men who were allowed to take up a lot of space in rooms that I thought to myself, why isn't someone like, Isabel taking up more space, right? We deserve just as much space. I'm not trying to take anything away from anyone. But I felt this really huge imbalance. And when I started writing the novel, I thought, oh, maybe this is a theme I wanted to explore. And it just came really, really to the forefront. And I think that just like I was saying about people in Washington Heights, it's there are so many brilliant, big ideas from women that we're missing because we're kind of shoving them into a corner. And I know I'm not the first person to notice that or say that, but I wanted to explore that in my own way and through Xiomara's point of view. And I hope I did that.
So this, like I said, is your debut novel. Do you plan on working on another book? What's next? Do you see maybe Xiomara's story continuing?
Well, I am working on a feature film right now of My Train Leaves at 3, which I can say, and I'm working with an amazing Dominican filmmaker whose name is Gabriela Ortega, and I love her, and we are writing our butts off for this feature. And I am working on my second novel, which I can't talk too much about, but it's going to be different and just as exciting. And I am feeling really inspired by it.
I can't wait to see like all these characters come to life.
Yeah, she's going to be really cool.
Yeah.
She's going to be really cool.
It's very exciting.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. It was such a pleasure
you.
getting to speak with you, and it was such a pleasure reading this book.
Thank you so much for taking the time to read it.
We have got a special edition of The Fine Print today. We're joined by 3 guests. Nancy George-Michalson, Executive Director of New York Therapy Animals. Also with us, a therapy dog team, Susan Spadafora and Ori, her yellow lab, who I think, guys, is the most relaxed guest we have ever had in the studio. He's decided to just lie right down. Thank you, all of you, for being here.
Well, thank you for having us.
So, Nancy, your organization is the New York City affiliate of the READ program, and READ stands for Reading Education Assistance Dogs. Take us through what that means, because children are quite literally reading to dogs, correct?
They are reading to dogs, and the program started way back in 1999 at Intermountain Therapy Animals in Salt Lake City, and I have to say it has expanded into almost every state in the United States in 29 different countries. So this is a very expansive program, a literacy program for children who are striving readers. They are having a little trouble in school. They're under a lot of pressure, and usually kindergarten to 3rd grade is when children are learning to read. So this is a free program that we have in the New York Public Library and in DOE private charter and community schools, where the therapy dog team, the handler and their dog, have been trained to work with children. They go through our training program for New York Therapy Animals, and they complete a program where they can work with kids in a school setting or in a library setting.
So Nancy touched on how these are very specially trained dogs. They go through a program. But from your perspective, Susan, why is that so important? What should people understand about that?
Well, I think first of all, dogs have to meet certain criteria to be eligible for this program. They have to be well trained. They have to follow basic commands. They have to not lunge, bark, bite, or even be aggressive. And then we go through a 7-week training program where there's a lot of situations where their patience and their appropriateness are tested.
I see.
To make sure that she could do this without being inappropriate.
They really have to be very reliable if they're going to be around
Very reliable,
young
very
children.
calm, very responsive to me and my commands. Like I can tell when a child is very afraid of a dog, and she will back up on command if she's getting too close. So there are certain things that they just need to know.
Yep.
Getting through the training and successfully completing the evaluation is sort of a nice way of saying, yeah, I think we can do this, and my dog is appropriate. But the true test is really going to the library. Once she's been certified and we know she's appropriate, then we see how she reacts, and I'm happy to say that she absolutely loves it. From the time I put her bandana on, she starts dancing around. She dances around the house and
I was going to
stares at
ask
the
you that,
door.
so she enjoys it. That's
She
great.
absolutely loves it.
That's great. So I know you were mentioning you work in a library, you volunteer in a library, but you're also in schools. So let's talk about sort of the academic piece of this. Nancy, what kind of improvement or progress do you see among children academically when they're part of this?
Right. Well, the READ program is not just any READ program. It is a specific trained program that we implement from our headquarters. So in a school environment, children are maybe a little timid, or they are not reaching their potential. They're lacking confidence. They're lacking social skills. They're shy. They don't want to read. They say, I don't like to read. And we always say, well, not yet, but we're going to do this together.
I just have to ask, from Ori's perspective, does she have a favorite book?
She loves books that are read with emotion. So if kids tell a story and they change their voice for different characters, doesn't matter what the book is about, she loves those books.
Interesting.
We actually have a book about how a dog chooses to become a therapy dog, and it goes through all the different jobs a dog could have. She actually loves that book because we insert her name instead.
So
of,
it's kind of a autobiography.
yeah.
Well, no wonder she likes that one. So just a last question for you, Nancy. If people would like more information, where can they go to get that?
Well, they can certainly come to our website, which is newyorktherapyanimals.org. They can find me and contact me for information. Not only do we want more people interested with their well-mannered dog and meet our requirements, but we're interested in hearing from schools that are interested in implementing this program in their school. And we're happy to try to accommodate. We need more people like Susan and Ori to be able to participate in the program.
Thank you so much to all of you. It has been such a treat having you here today.
Well, thank you so much for having us. We had so much fun. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Ori, you're a good girl. You're a very good girl. And now it is time for Uncensored. As usual, author and critic Linda Stasi has plenty to say about what she's reading.
A new book about Amelia Earhart with a title as long as her doomed final flight explains why we're still interested in a lady flyer who disappeared nearly 90 years ago. The Aviator and the Showman, Amelia Earhart, George Putnam, and the Marriage That Made an American Icon by Laurie Gwen Shapiro is that book. I mean, who knew Amelia Earhart was a gossip machine / style influencer back in the day? Or that Earhart was a social worker and an amateur pilot who broke up a marriage, wasn't all that great a flyer, and married and was manipulated by a guy who makes Trump look like Abe Lincoln. Yes, she did become famous as the first woman to fly across the Atlantic, except, and again, who knew, she was a passenger, not the pilot. That first transatlantic flight started as a publicity stunt promoted by her married publisher, George Putnam, who became her husband. He started out looking for a young, attractive woman with flying experience who could then write an adventure book. And in walked Earhart. Semi-broke George publicized her flight across the Atlantic as though she'd been the pilot, then got her to do ever more dangerous publicity stunts until the final fatal one. Amelia, for her part, became a very good pilot, but not a very careful one. In fact, she even left behind important maps and equipment for her final doomed flight. This book has lots of interesting info, but it's too long. The first third was like reading a textbook biography about somebody's not very interesting family. It does get a whole lot better, though, and is well worth the read. Bottom line? This is a good book in need of an even better editor, somebody who could have separated the wheat from the chaff to get to the chaff a whole lot quicker. Courting the Sun, a novel of Versailles by Peggy Jock Williams, is a perfectly awful book with a ton of good reviews. Huh? It reads like it was written by a retired grade school teacher, which the author is, who went on a group tour and wrote a book report called Everything I Learned About Versailles and the Royalty of the Time. This literal bodice ripper has zero tension and endless, needless, minute descriptions of gowns and meals that sound like they were written by a wannabe food influencer. The heroine, who doesn't deserve to be called a protagonist, is a country girl swept up in the royal court of Louis XIV and is admired by all for her wit and brilliance. And yet, she's as dull as a napkin. And that dialogue, it's so cringy, it'll make you wish you were illiterate. Meantime, the king never has any responsibilities other than dancing ballet and having mistresses. No political intrigue, no foreign wars, nothing. Too bad Williams didn't write about how Louis XIV had hard gangrene and smelled so bad that his courtiers would faint from the stink. Now that would have been interesting. For Uncensored, I'm Linda Stasi.
That wraps up another chapter for us. Thanks so much for being here. A quick reminder to download our CUNY TV app so you can watch us on the go and check out our social media. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Carol Anne Riddell. See you next time on Book It.